Here we go. We're doing Meet Ephraim, and this is part 2. We're going to take a look at Abraham and possibly Isaac. So Abraham is our dude. And again, back here, let me find my slide. Before we kind of got off on that what the fuck rant. We're after the flood. We're after Babel, but we're before Moses and the Exodus. So no one's gone off to Egypt yet, okay? And Abraham is the dude that came down from Ur. He lived in Ur, and he came down from Ur, the land of the Chaldeans, which is basically southern Turkey-ish, northern Syria, southern Turkey-ish. And he crossed over the Euphrates. We get that word, crossover. He's called the first Hebrew in the Bible, or the first person to be set apart for this mission. Okay? Abraham used to be called Abram, and he goes through a name change because people with a special mission often get name changes from God. All right, he's got 8 sons, but somehow, his son Isaac is referred to as the monogenes, or the firstborn. Okay, or monogenes, only born. But, or if you want to be liberal about it, uniquely born. But monogenes, only born. He can't be the only born because he's like number 6 or 7 in line of 8 brothers, 8 sons of Abraham. So what makes Isaac special? Well, Isaac is the only son that occurred between Abraham and Sarah. And Sarah was Abraham's beloved wife. He had other wives, other mistresses, concubines or maidservants, whatever you want to call them, to populate. But Sarah was barren. And so she was actually a miracle. Isaac was a miracle birth in an old shriveled up womb. I think they had Isaac when they were really old. But God promised him that with Sarah, he would have a son that would be Hebrew and set apart. Okay. And so the only son of Abraham and Sarah, it's important, that starts the lineage, that kicks it off. Okay. Now, what happens to the other 7 sons? Well, those other 7 sons go on to inhabit places like Edomites, Moabites, Arabs. You know, they're all through Jordan or Saudi or whatever. So you've got all these other sons that are a part of that region. You know, so when Israel, this comes into modern politics. When modern politics comes in and Israel says, well, it's our land and our bloodline, they're like, dude, we've been here since Ishmael. Like there's other sons, okay? Like you guys aren't the only sons. We've been living here the whole fucking time too. So that's why the Arabs and the Jordanians and the Palestinians and the Egyptians and all of these people also claim heritage back to this same land. It's not like there was nobody there except for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's a shit ton of other people in this family. They just may not be the quote unquote Hebrew nation that are set apart to bring on the Messiah to save humanity. That's the difference. That's the difference. All right, so Abraham is known as the father of the Hebrew nation, and we know what Hebrew means, and we know what nation means. As he's coming down from Ur, he encounters God, and God makes him these promises. Okay, and we're going to get to those in a second. But on his way, doing various stuff, and I'm just doing I'm cutting a check for 35% and calling it good. Okay, I'm just getting us to what we need to know to get back into Luke. Abraham meets this mysterious figure named Melchizedek. In the New Testament, you will hear lines that say Jesus is a priest, a high priest in the order of Melchizedek. That's because you've got the Zadok priesthood, sons of Aaron priests, Levite priests. You've got this tribal priesthood that comes into play after Moses. But remember, we're way the fuck before Moses. So we're way back. We're way back before Moses. And there's already a high priest of God that Abraham encounters, right? I told you there's other stuff going on earth with God. Okay. So Melchizedek had already met God, but he's not part of the Hebrew nation. So he doesn't have a really big place in the Bible. But Melchizedek, I'll just give you a little piece here. Melchizedek knew God. He was the king of a land called Salem, and he was following the spiritual Torah. In other words, 10 Commandments, moral guy, aligned to the royal law with his hearts and his thought and his mind, serving God, and acting as high priest for the region in his little kingdom in the middle of nowhere. So amongst these Canaanites and these pagan baby eaters, you've got this good guy who's actually knows God. And he was such a great guy and knew God so well. Abraham had just met God. He wasn't really sure. So Melchizedek is sort of his elder, if you will. He's a guy that's known God for a long time and has been serving God for a long time. So Abraham actually gives him tribute and sort of bows down to Melchizedek. And Melchizedek gives him a blessing. And there's a whole little scene. And then you don't hear about him again until way later in the New Testament. And it's like, well, Jesus is a high priest in the order of Melchizedek, which means he's not a Levite priest by blood from a tribe of priests. He's from the royal law or the natural law priesthood, like Melchizedek was. All right, so they're making that comparison for you. So that's who Melchizedek is. We'll do a whole long study on him eventually. But Melchizedek kind of met Abraham or Abram along the way, along his journey. And we find out that Melchizedek is the king of Salem. Now, the place where this is taking place seems to be Shiloh, which is a town in the north, which eventually, hundreds of years later, becomes known as Shiloh, which is in the region that eventually, hundreds of years later, the tribe of Ephraim will actually inherit. But as of now, nobody's inherited shit because they're not even born yet. Okay? But he's in that same place. Of course, your Babylonians say, no. He wasn't king of Shiloh. That's not God's place. God's place is Jerusalem. So he was king of Jerusalem. Although, the root word for Salem and Jerusalem, that root word is Shiloh. So both of those words, Salem and Jerusalem, come from Shiloh. But we're not getting into an etymology of ancient Hebrew right now. Just know there's that debate. And they're not going to excavate Shiloh. That's the place they want to put an 8-lane highway over, so don't look there. All right, then Abram changes his name to Abraham because he knows God and he's going to have his mission. He's the father of the Hebrews now. He builds an altar in a town called Bethel. I want you to write down Bethel, and I don't want you to get Bethel and Bethlehem confused right now. Do not confuse those. We're going to keep them as two separate places. He builds an altar in Bethel. Write that down because you're going to see a whole lot of Bethel coming up in the Old Testament. Bethel is also a city in the north, and it happens to be really close to Shiloh. I think they're like 10 miles away from each other. So, maybe. And that's like if you look on a modern map and you're driving the car around like the janky route. But I think if you're walking straight, it's going to be even less than that. So maybe 6 miles from each other as the crow flies from Shiloh to Bethel. So this is why I say he didn't build his altar in Jerusalem. He didn't meet him he can't meet Melchizedek in Jerusalem and then travel 10 days to get to fucking Bethel to build his altar. Like, right? It doesn't make sense. When you start to know where these places are, you can catch them. They're like, oh, so he's walking down the street and he meets Melchizedek, the king of Salem. And then he builds an altar in Bethel. And they're like, oh, and you're like, where's Salem? Oh, it's Jerusalem. Okay, well, where's Bethel? 50 miles away. Oh, well, where's Shiloh? 5 miles away. Well, where do you think they met? It's like, it doesn't make sense. They have these people walking all over the fucking place all the time, back and forth from Jerusalem, and it's really funny. So he builds an altar in Bethel, which is near Shiloh. All right. And God gives him a threefold covenant. That means there's three pieces to this covenant. And somehow people like to forget that a covenant has two parties in it. So they're both promising something to the other. So your obedience, and you get this. You do this, and I do that. Covenant does not mean a one-way deal where God is just giving you free shit. Okay? That's one of the problems with the modern Zionist thinking people today, is that God just miraculously promised this land forever and ever, no matter what. Go ahead and eat babies. Go ahead and blow shit up. Go ahead and kill everybody. Do what you want. The land's yours, no matter what. No matter what you do, you just get that land. No matter who's there, no matter what year it is, no matter how evil your leader is, no matter how secular you are, you just get that land no matter what. That's not a covenant. That's lunacy. Okay? So there's actually this covenant. Part of this covenant is that you're going to have this land for you and your descendants. Okay? But remember, there's an obedience piece that goes with the land. I will be your God, you will be my people, and I will give you this land. So, like, it's a thing. People will argue and say, no, they just get the land for free. No, there's a whole bunch of biblical evidence that the land's not free. Like, you have to do shit. You have to be God's people. All right, and obey him. So that's why I argue Israel is a secular state, okay? God didn't give it to the Rothschilds and to Netanyahu to do their janky secular warmongering shit. That would not be in keeping with the covenant. So no matter how badly you want it to fit, 1948 was not a miracle. It was a takeover. But anyways, I digress. He also promises Abraham that his seed or his lineage he's going to sprout up a lineage to be great, and that through this seed and lineage that God sets up, many nations all around the world will come out of this seed and be richly blessed. So this sort of gives you an idea of the promises that God made to Abraham, and that those blessings were going to come from the womb of Sarah. And then they get really old and they're like, oh shit, I guess I have to give this my blessings. I have to hand it down, the inheritance of these blessings, but I don't have a son with Sarah. I only have sons with, the maidservant people, the other wives. So I guess I have to give it to one of them. And God's like, no. You will have a son with Sarah. I promise. And then he gets older and he's like fucking 100 years old. And he's like, well, obviously we're not having a son now. So I'm going to pass my inheritance down to these other kids. And he said, no. I promise you, you're going to have a son with Sarah. And finally, in their old age, Sarah finally births Isaac, which is why Isaac is the monogenes, or the only born between Abraham and Sarah. And that is the son who carries on this threefold covenant of God to start to build this Hebrew nation. So even though Isaac's got 7 brothers, those 7 brothers are not Hebrews. Only Hebrew nation is coming from Isaac and Sarah. The other brothers are great, and they may have populated, Jordan or Palestine or Egypt or Saudi Arabia, or Moab, but they're just not that lineage that the Bible is written about. Okay? It doesn't mean they're not in the land and that they don't deserve to be there. Okay? You don't get to kill everybody just because you're not in that divine elected person. So Isaac's your divine election, and he's the monogenes. All right. Now, Isaac has twin sons. Okay? He's got one wife and one wife only. He's not running around with a bunch of other wives. And him and his wife have twin sons, and their names are Esau, who becomes Edom or the Edomites, and Jacob, who becomes Israel. And with that, we'll come back to Isaac the next time. Bye.